You're listening to Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong, all on Georgia Radio Network. So this is episode 16 of the Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong podcast. I am Jonathan Giles, and I'm here every week. I'm your host. Jessica Salaji is not with us this week. She apparently took off to Mexico to elope, or we've also heard rumors that she may be up in Colorado smoking the ganja. We might try to text her later on in the show to see where she's at. But we have Catherine Bernard here. Catherine Bernard is a public defender and an outstanding attorney, an expert on constitutional law and civil rights. So we are very pleased to have her with us tonight.
Well, I am very pleased to be here, Jonathan.
All right. And we also have Matt Lowe here. He's
Yo.
not an expert on anything, but he is drinking beer and sometimes he cracks funny jokes.
Right? That's my job.
Getting started in national news. Out in California, the great land of California, in West Hollywood, a city that has branded itself as WeHo. They have given Stormy Daniels, the porn star extraordinaire who allegedly had relations of a sexual nature with Donald Trump. I'm very careful to use the word allegedly quite often there. But she has been given the key to the city, and May the 23rd has been deemed Stormy Daniels Day in the city of West Hollywood. So there is that.
Well, they have certainly chosen somebody who has made an impressive contribution to American political discussion.
That she has, been on 60 Minutes.
People just love to talk about a porn star.
Right.
They do. It's quite impressive because everything kind of flips with when you're talking about Stormy Daniels. There's a lot of I've seen a lot of things on Twitter and on social media where people that are normally very cautious about the language that they use, particularly referring to women. They'll refer to Stormy Daniels with all manner of insults, and then on the other side you have the people that are normally utterly opposed to Stormy Daniels who suddenly love her because she's anti-Trump. So suppose it's one of those, the friend of my, or the enemy of my friend is my, what am I trying to say, Matt?
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
That's what I'm trying to say. And if we would get there eventually, but strange bedfellows, which that's kind of a thing on its own. And so
I just learned something reading this article about it. Her
Yeah.
real name is Stephanie Clifford.
yes, I actually, I kind of read up a little bit about it, and it's I saw that in some earlier articles. It's a bit odd that they're not going with the Stephanie Clifford thing. She's as opposed to Stormy Daniels, but my understanding is that she's still out doing the thing. So and as a
Well, will you gentlemen be coming to see her in Brookhaven when she comes to the Pink Pony this summer?
Man, I vote we do a live podcast from there.
that sounds like a good time. I'll have to check my list of establishments that I was booted from in my early 20s and make sure that that's not one of them.
Well, it does seem like something that would be very relevant to Georgia politics, given that we just imposed a strip club tax just a few short legislative sessions ago.
Oh That's right. That was the one to fight some kind of sex trafficking or something, wasn't it?
It was amazing. I actually attended one of the legislative committee hearings, and they had testimony from one of the nonprofits that wanted to get the funding. And would you imagine the amount they needed was exactly the amount that was projected to be collected? I just thought that was an amazing coincidence.
Right?
Well, I mean,
Wow.
with the amount of money that this state purports to spend on sex trafficking, I am amazed that it exists at all. It's just incredible to me. And yet we still need more. Paulette Rakestraw attempted in the 2016 session to basically put the state of Georgia in the business of selling pornography, and that was purportedly for the purpose of stopping child sex trafficking. That was
I
also
say,
when we met our friend Chris Severe.
Did you ever get to have to deal with Chris Severe, Catherine?
I don't believe I had the pleasure, but I remember a couple of years ago he was very active in interacting with the All on Georgia folks, with you and Jessica.
Yeah, he was. All right, so he's that nutbag that was disbarred from the state of Tennessee. He's a Nashville-based attorney for, I think, probably a very short time. Um, and he was disbarred, and now he's like filed suits all over the nation trying to marry his laptop because he's addicted to the porn that's on it. And
Well,
he was threatening to sue us in federal court. It was an
What was
amazing.
he going to sue you for?
I don't
Did you
know.
encourage the relationship?
No, I think I was. I mean, I was pretty liberal with my use of words that meant crazy or psycho or sociopath, things like that. And he was just
yeah,
he,
just to be on the safe side, I sent some of the screenshots to a real attorney who advised me that I should probably just not bother the guy because he's not actually a real threat to anybody, but that he does know enough that I could have to spend an afternoon in federal court. So before a judge laughed the case out of court and we all went home. But he's like, yeah, it's still going to probably cost you a half day of work time.
I told him I'd be happy for him to sue me if he personally served me the papers.
But a really interesting topic to discuss related to that is, on a much more serious note, it is downright frightening the amount of the amount of pull that he has apparently shown, because it's not like it's not like we can just laugh at Paulette Rakestraw and be like, aha, she got duped by this idiot. This is a nationwide push,
Yeah,
and
there's been a lot of people that were duped by that video.
yeah, he has been successful. Well, I hate to use the word successful. To my knowledge, and I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, I don't think that he's actually passed what he truly wanted to pass, which was the legislation requiring that all devices that can access the internet be basically firewalled, and you had to pay $20 to get it removed. I don't think that he's actually been successful with that, but anywhere. But he has been successful in multiple states, including this one, in getting porn declared as a health crisis, as a public health crisis.
Well, that's what the government needs to be worried about for sure. Sorry, I hope the sarcasm came through on
No,
that.
it
Oh,
didn't.
loud and clear, loud and clear.
It does seem like with all of the issues facing our government that are of just such importance, the priorities, it's hard to understand.
And speaking of elected officials and interfacing with porn, which interfacing with porn is a Chris Severe term that he enjoyed using. Um, Donald Trump is back in the news, according to Bloomberg. A federal judge in Manhattan has declared that Trump cannot block users from commenting on his Twitter account. This is a groundbreaking decision, says Clay Calvert, a First Amendment expert who teaches at the University of Florida College of Journalism. It establishes that social media accounts operated by a government official, even the President of the United States, constitutes a public forum. Now, I don't know why in the world, other than the fact that this was written by a journalist, that they decided to go to a professor of journalism to get a quote on this story as opposed to, like contacting an actual constitutional lawyer to see what they think.
That's what we've done.
Yeah, so, yeah, we actually have one here in the room. So, Catherine, what do you think about all this?
Well, I think Twitter is a private company, and so they should be able to pursue whatever policies they want. But I think there's something to the argument that a politician choosing to use a particular platform of communication with constituents means that that politician doesn't have a right to shut off some constituents from viewing it.
Right, absolutely. And apparently, the tweet in question here is um, Donald Trump tweeted that he would have had zero chance of winning the White House if he had relied on the fake news. And Rebecca Buckwalter replied, "To be fair, you didn't win the White House. Russia won it for you," at which point he was blocked. The judge said Trump couldn't suppress such responses.
Well, that makes sense. Again, that people are going to say stupid stuff, and as a politician, you don't have the right to silence them. I think it is a unique platform. It gives somebody more power to speak directly to a politician than they might have had in the past. But I think it still does come down to the politician is choosing to use this platform as a way to communicate with people. You can't just shut people down because you don't like what they have to say.
Right, and with Donald Trump in particular, I haven't done any actual like tabulations on it or anything like that, but I believe just doing a cursory glance, I would say that Donald Trump uses his real Donald Trump Twitter a lot more than he uses the POTUS account, which is, of course, the official White House account that he inherited from Obama, which was the at POTUS account.
And I
Um,
believe that's being archived at the Library of Congress.
right.
Really
Yes. Yes, all those tweets are archived.
interesting. It makes me wonder, like as technology evolves, you know, obviously, like our parents would have never thought this would be a thing, right? And like I see it, but now I sit here and I wonder, in 50 years, you know, what are my kids going to be doing a podcast about? Talking about some other form of instant communication with their elected officials that probably the Supreme Court is going to have to make a ruling on regarding.
Well, I have to say, I think the social media stuff really is a great way of being able to get in touch directly with politicians. Even if the founding fathers might not have anticipated it, I think they'd be thrilled with it now that it's here. So rather than trying to shut it down, I think Donald Trump and any other politician really just benefits from being able to say, hey, you know what? Say whatever you want. I've got supporters who are going to respond to you. You know, I'm going to be able to share my message regardless of what you're tweeting back at me. I can take it.
Right. I agree. I really don't think politicians should block their constituents ever. Uh, I'm looking
But
at
then
you,
you do have
Paula
some
Rex
pretty
Strong.
You
What'd you
do get
say?
some
Oh
legitimately
no.
abusive behavior, though, unfortunately. People who just are screaming nothing but profanity, not adding anything of substance. That's when you start to get into a tough situation of what actually becomes abusive.
Right. I think that at that point it's fair to start deleting comments. Um, and see, like I don't know, man. Trump has, his gonna be, anyone in the United States. I could make the argument that like say my state house rep, she could block anyone and everyone outside of the 19th district, and in my mind, she would, like that would be okay because those folks are not her constituents. But I don't think she should be blocking anyone within them.
Right. With the changing technology, I mean, really, yeah, we are far closer than, the old days of, sending letters to the White House and, having some secretary respond. And, apparently now we live in a world where I can tweet to the president, and this president apparently sits up half the night reading them. So, you
Hey,
know,
maybe that's why we're not at war in Syria right now, because people were actually able to convey, no, we really, really don't want this.
yeah,
Yep, yep.
that is certainly true. Speaking of people getting things that they don't want, Casey Cagle came out on top of the governor's race last week. He had 39% of the vote. Brian Kemp had 25.56%, bringing him in second place. So it's going to be a runoff between Cagle and Kemp. Um, Kemp, of course, former Secretary of State. The job
Current
that he,
Secretary of
well,
State,
yeah, that
still the one
that's true.
running the election system. So it's interesting to see his face right up there above the results. Include him.
Yeah, well, see, actually, I use clarityelections.com, so I don't see his face.
Well, that's just very unlucky for you.
I begrudgingly became a fan of his commercials. Matt and I both did. So
I feel the same way. I really appreciate the way that when he was talking about deporting people in his truck, he talked about the criminal illegals, not just a deportation bus for everybody. To me, that was kind of a message like, I'm going to leave Jose the blueberry picker alone. We're only going to deport you if you're actually posing a threat to public safety. And honestly, that's kind of the most sensible perspective I've heard on immigration from a major Republican in some time.
I just like the fact that he cranked the truck.
Right? I love that she just said Jose the blueberry picker. Because I've always in a previous episode I had stated that when it came to illegal immigration, I don't care because it doesn't affect me because I don't pick fruit for a living. So that's why
Well,
it tickled
and
me.
people who want to come here and make a better life for themselves and their families, we should welcome them. Georgia has a big agricultural industry, a big tourism industry. We need hardworking folks to come in and help us continue to make Georgia great.
Yep, yep, yep.
Uh, Over on the Democrat side, Stacey Abrams took that one to a landslide. She had 76.43% of the vote. So,
And I'll tell you, I wasn't expecting it to be that kind of a blowout, particularly when I saw how much support Stacey Evans was getting from the Democratic establishment, including pretty much all the Black power players in the legislature and a lot of local officials as well.
right, and it's a very odd situation because I feel that just looking at it as a guy that studied as a student of politics more than just looking at it as just an unbiased student of politics. I believe that it was a situation where Evans couldn't beat Abrams in the Democrat primary, but I do believe that Evans stands a better chance of beating Cagle in the general than Abrams does.
Oh, don't tell me you're deciding the runoff already there, Jonathan.
Well, I mean, I'm just looking at the math. I'm hoping for Kemp, but you know, I'm really hoping that that the Hunter Hill people that Hunter Hill can mobilize his people to get behind Kemp, because I do believe that Hunter Hill very likely will, come out and support Kemp over Cagle. But I could be wrong. And of course, Tippins is right there with Hunter. Tippins' numbers are at 12.22. Michael Williams bringing up the rear with 4.87%. I do feel that the deportation bus hurt Michael Williams with his own base,
Right.
even more than I thought it would when I saw it. I knew that it was going to hurt him with people that never intended to vote for him in any event, but I didn't really think that it was going to, make his own base start abandoning him. But
That was the way I felt. Michael Williams had the best voting record of any of the candidates who, they pretty much all had some kind of legislative record for us to look at. Michael Williams had the strongest one, which, of course, that's still not saying a whole lot. But that deportation bus, it really played to just the worst stereotypes of ignorant, cruel Republicans.
Right. I agree.
right.
Did y'all ever see the inside of that bus?
I saw a couple of pictures people posted on Facebook. It didn't look very comfortable. I think that's why they always had an RV following it, right?
Well, a friend of mine, um, when it broke down, they parked it on his neighbor's property, and so they went over and got a few pictures in there. It's a hippie bus. Like it's got you know some like I guess what I would probably describe as 60s or 70s kind of psychedelic paintings on the ceiling, and it's empty except for it's got hardwood floors and a toilet in the very back left hand corner of it.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. I wish I had known this from the beginning. It was a hippie bus. I mean, maybe he's a little kinder to these illegal immigrants than we thought.
Right?
Who knows?
I mean, hardwood floors. That's fancy
Yeah,
stuff.
it was. I was like, I was kind of looking at the pictures and I looked at because we're in the middle of remodeling our home, and so every time I see something of interest like flooring or whatever, I'm always looking at it to see if it's something I would like for my house. And I paid a lot of attention to the flooring in that bus because it was very pretty, which I just thought was funny for the deportation bus. But
there's no telling where that bus came from.
I'll tell you where it came from is Seth Weathers.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know it came from his brain. I just,
Well, I'll try not to hold Michael's campaign staff against him. One of his campaign staffers is someone who actually filed an ethics complaint against me back in 2016, which actually the hearing on that is coming up next month. That ethics commission just moving right along on these complaints. So I've tried not to hold that against Michael, even when his campaign office got broken into and they stole that $300,000 worth of Bitcoin mining rig. Uh, my campaign office had gotten broken into a couple of years ago, and the campaign staffer in question made fun of me on Twitter about it. Can you believe?
really,
well, did they steal your Bitcoin mining operation?
I'm afraid I was not cool enough to have a Bitcoin mining operation, and we're not really sure they stole anything, but the artwork that was spray painted was quite spectacular.
Wow.
wow.
Yeah. So,
Probably not as good as the psychedelic pictures on the top of the deportation bus, but you know.
Yeah, it was cool. I'll have to see if I can get a hold of some of those pictures.
You know,
Please
the
post
best. Yeah, I would love to see that. You know, one of the best things that I saw on the Williams campaign tour was up in Dahlonega. They uh, they had the best greeting that I have seen. They brought out a mariachi band to meet the Michael Williams deportation bus,
Now that is very poetic.
and
That was hilarious.
yeah, that they sang he was in a like a shopping center, like a strip mall, grocery store shopping center, and they stood on the sidewalk at the top of the hill, and the bus was at the bottom of the hill, and they sang the entire time that he was down there. It was
There was only like 6 people or something
yeah.
that came to see it. There was 40 that were there to protest him.
Well, now, did they get this idea from the gentleman up in New York who started screaming at people for speaking Spanish? I heard people hired a mariachi band to follow him around as well.
So that's awesome.
Full employment for mariachi bands, clearly, this election season.
We're creating jobs.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So on to the lieutenant governor's race. That almost did not end up in a runoff. That was, of course, a three-way race between David Schaefer, Jeff Duncan, and Rick Jafares from Henry County.
I think he pronounces it Jeffries.
He does. We just call him Jafaris on here
Because you want him to sound like the evil character in Aladdin as much as possible.
Right, or Lion King or whatever it is.
You know, I have to say, he's the one that I had not met prior to this election. And he did come and speak at the DeKalb Republican Assembly. So it was a small group. And I always give, politicians credit for coming up and, speaking to any group of concerned citizens. And I found myself liking him a little more than I expected based on his legislative record, which I don't think has been impressive. But he's from Henry County, it sounds like, and started out as a county commissioner, focused on infrastructure, has some construction experience. I found myself saying, hey, maybe we can hire him for DeKalb County to deal with our water and sewer stuff.
Paul.
Well, he's available. But David Schaefer came just a little bit short with 48.92% of the vote. So, of course, in Georgia races to win, even in a three-way, you've got to have 50% plus one vote. Jeff Duncan will be his runoff opponent on July the 24th. Jeff Duncan with 26.64% of the vote. Duncan is, Duncan went very negative, and apparently it came out for him. I don't know how it's gonna work for him in the runoff, particularly with Schaefer already so close to succeeding. But it's Duncan really went low, really negative. It was just a whole lot of attacks.
So do we know if that whole lobbyist accusation of sexual harassment against David Schaefer really was linked to the Duncan campaign? Because I have to say, while there are plenty of people at the Georgia Capitol who I would not be surprised to see a sexual harassment accusation against, David Schaefer would not be high on that list. I'll give him credit for that.
Right?
Yeah, it's
I don't know where it came from. I do know that they obviously figured out it was completely and totally made up.
and he'll be facing Democrat opponent Sarah Riggs Amico, who she's apparently not done a fantastic job of campaigning, because even Jessica had no idea who she was or what she was about. So,
well, she's a business owner, isn't she? I think she owns like a trucking company.
yeah, I think it's some type of business, something in the logistics field. But as far as actual speeches, policies, YouTube videos, there was just not a lot there. But she came out with 55.28% of the vote. And one of the more interesting races was the Republican Secretary of State's race, which was much closer than a lot of the other races. It was a four-way race between David Bell Isle, Buzz Brockway, Josh McCoon, and Brad Raffensperger. And Raffensperger came out on top. David Bell Isle came out in second. Of course, Raffensperger has legislative experience. David Bell Isle, he is very well known in Alpharetta. He's also the leading. He's also leading the money race. And that leaves out McCoon and Brockway, which was not at all what I was expecting. Honestly, I expected the runoff to be between McCoon and Brockway, but
I thought at least one of them would be in the runoff. I'll confess that was the probably the biggest disappointment for me last night was to see that Josh McCoon didn't make it into that runoff. You know, he is an elections lawyer. Even outside of his capacity as a state senator, you know, he was involved in getting ballot access for people who are running as independents, you know, down in Stewart County and other places. He really walked the walk on accountability and transparency, which is what I think you want in that office. And I'll tell you, you know, I'm certainly looking forward to learning more about Mr. Raffensperger and Mr. Belle. But I think the Republicans really missed a chance to have a solid, principled elections lawyer in exactly the kind of role where we need him.
right,
I didn't know that about him.
yeah. And Belle Isle is an attorney. However, he's a real estate attorney, and Raffensperger is a businessman. He runs a. I had an opportunity to hear him speak at a local GOP meeting in Douglas County. So he ran a tech company of some type. I'm not really sure of exactly the type, but yeah,
It's
McCoon.
funny how after hearing him speak, you're still not really sure about it. That was my experience when he came and spoke to a group after the sixth, when he was running for the sixth district. Which again, you know, it's not necessarily something negative. It could just be they were getting confidential contracts and were doing a lot of work from the government. But it would be interesting to get a little more information about that.
Yeah, I would like to know more about exactly what he did because it would not hurt to have a web guy in the Secretary of State's office. I will say that.
Well, you need somebody who's going to be responsive on the issue of licensing, you know. Heck, let's be idealist here. How about somebody who's going to roll back these kinds of licensing regulations, actually
Good
make
Lord,
business
yes.
friendly? No more of these, you know, let's license lactation consultant bills.
Yeah,
Funny enough, my wife was asking me about that. She's a doula and hangs out in the crowd of where lactation consultants hang, and she asked me about that, and I'm like, why? Why do we need to involve the government in that particular thing? Why can't you just do your own research and hire whoever the hell you want to? And she ultimately agreed with me, but she had a lot of friends that that really went to bat for that legislation. And as it turns out, they had the type of certification that the state would license. So,
Well, I think a lot of people think of government regulation as oh, safer. And unfortunately, those of us who have been involved really at any level in government process, I think have lost a lot of faith in that concept. You know, having licensing doesn't necessarily make things safer, but it does make it more expensive for people to start participating and really just makes it more difficult for entrepreneurs and consumers alike.
right.
right.
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like a perfect example is I know that for one of the things that I know from my background is if you're involved in any type of private investigations or security type work, um, you have to have either an immense amount of time as a law enforcement officer, or you can just bypass that by having a criminal justice degree. Because we all know that a 23-year-old adult, I won't use the term kid, but we all know that a 23-year-old fresh out of college with that CJ degree, that they certainly know all there is to know about going and gathering evidence for attorneys. So There's certainly no, I'm sure that that you know requirement for a criminal justice degree is just that. It's there for the added expense, and it's put there by people that want it to be expensive to get into that business. So
Well, now that you mentioned degrees, I do have to mention something funny I heard, which is, we've got three folks left in the Georgia governor's race at this point, and between them, they have four advanced educational degrees, 75% of which belong to Stacey Abrams.
Really?
Yes, and I'm not one of those people who says, college is everything, everybody needs to go to college. My congressional representative here in the 6th district does not have a college degree, but I think this is something that is potentially going to come up as an issue in the race that Republicans do need to be aware of.
Right.
right,
Interesting.
and on the Democrat side of the Secretary of State, John Barrow, he took a three-way race without a runoff. So came out with 51.51% of the vote. And so there will be no runoff. So in November, whoever wins the July 24th runoff between Belle Isle and Raffensperger will be facing John Barrow, who, of course, Barrow is a very experienced, very articulate politician, and he's certainly, knows his way around the campaign trail. So I think that's going to be a very interesting race come November.
Especially because you're looking at both of the Republican candidates are from North Fulton. And then you've got John Barrow, who, as the last Southern white Democrat, was repeatedly redistricted all over the Savannah, Augusta area. And he actually moved so he could stay within the 12th district, even as it continued to be gerrymandered. When I moved down to Dublin, I was in the 12th district. Well, first we were in the 8th with Austin Scott, and then there was the redistricting. And John Barrow was very well liked by both Republicans and Democrats. He survived a challenge and from Lee Anderson, and then Rick Allen was eventually able to take him out. But I think John Barrow has a lot of friends, probably on both sides of the aisle, that he's going to be able to call on around the state.
Right. And it's definitely, particularly, if Belle Isle ends up coming out on top because of the fact that most of his government experience has been with the city of Alpharetta, and he's so it's you're basically talking about a guy that's been very involved in city politics. Now, granted, I mean it's not like being involved in city politics in the city of Dublin. I mean, there's a lot more people in Alpharetta, but still it's not quite the match for somebody that's been very involved in statewide politics for quite some time.
Right. And we have to remember that rural Georgia provides a lot of the votes that Republicans count on in these statewide races. So when you have someone like John Barrow, I think he's presenting a little bit more of a threat than that's being acknowledged right now.
Right, particularly with the way that this race came out, because I'm not from down there, but according to Jessica said that to her knowledge that the only two that she saw were Brockway and McCoon, that both of them came down to do campaign stops, and that she's
And
not.
Belle Isle and Raffensperger, they were just not relying on that. They were relying on heavy mail. I got several pieces from both of them, and it does seem like those of us who are, in the know on these things, can sometimes discount the importance of mail, since that's the only impression a lot of people get.
Right.
Of course, Brad's signs, those were the first signs that I saw go up. And I saw them go up early, like early fall.
Yeah.
And
And that
someone
was
said
all I saw.
today,
I didn't have any mail. Sorry, go ahead.
well, I heard today that sign purchasing, actually paying people to have their signs in your yard has become more and more common. And I will say that any specific information, but given the places that I'm seeing a lot of these big signs, that would not surprise me. It'd certainly be an interesting question at a forum if any of these candidates are willing to answer. Is it your policy to pay people who put their signs in your yard, or are you only putting them in the yards and property of volunteers?
Right.
And you very well may be onto something because I'm not going to drop a name here because I don't want to throw out an unfounded allegation. But I witnessed a prominent statewide Republican who in my area, and I live in a blue county. Douglas County is blue, and the part of Douglas County that I live in is heavy David Scott territory, and there were numerous homes in down the road from me that had the sign of this prominent statewide Republican, as well as David Scott signs and signs for a local Solicitor General candidate who was also a Democrat. So it was just a was an odd thing.
Oh, that's very interesting. And that, I mean, that's direct observation. I love to see the kind of the combinations of signs that people will have in their yards. I think that can be very telling.
Right. There's a house up the road from me. They sit right at the intersection of two state highways, and they typically have signs for every candidate that's running. And I think they just allow because they're aware of their geographic position to an extremely busy intersection. And so I think they just allow everyone to put their signs in. So you'll see every Republican running, every Democrat, all the local stuff, even if it's not, that particular district. Like I live in the 19th district, but the 17th district is pretty close. So I would see signs for, 19 candidates and 17 candidates. You know, I so I just assumed that they allowed everyone's signs to go up because they were all there.
They're either being paid or they just don't have the ability to say no.
Right.
Don't
Yeah,
have
I
heart
mean,
to-
there's 40 freaking signs in their yard.
Just get off my porch.
Well, call me naive, but I never even considered the idea of paying people to put signs in their yard. And I remember one time when I was knocking on doors for office, and somebody said he would support me, and I asked if he wanted a sign, and he asked if I would pay him to put the sign up, and I'll tell you, it made me very uncomfortable. I thought, this man is inviting me to participate in an ethical violation, and so I didn't do it because I thought it would be unethical to. And so it's interesting to find out, maybe the norms have changed. Who knows? Maybe it was always okay to pay for signs. And like I said, I was just naive.
Well, and the thing about it is when you look at it from the perspective of, the actual statistics and the research, it's not a good place to put your money. There have been countless political science studies that have been done that have shown that yard signs are like the least effective way for a candidate to campaign. It's number one, particularly for small races, has always been door knocking, followed by the phone call, the real phone call, not the robocall, the real phone call, followed by direct mail. Direct mail still matters in the political realm. In the rest of the marketing realm, it doesn't work at all, and you're just wasting your money. But it is utterly amazing what you can accomplish with knocking on, putting in the actual legwork, knocking on doors, and making phone calls.
I'm going to have to say, I think that's starting to break off more by district because having walked for candidates around the state, there is just such a difference in the way you are received, say, in a North Georgia district. People are thrilled to have you knock on their door. They love to talk politics. They want to tell you their opinion. And in a place like my district, more urban, people are used to kind of having a lot of folks knock on their doors trying to sell them something. People don't like it as much. They turn you away. It's more of a negative thing. So, and mail seems to have more impact. So I'm wondering how much of that really does shift depending on the character of your individual district.
And you may very well be correct, because I've seen that as well. I know that when you're down in the I've done some I've done some door knocking here in Douglas County for some candidates, and it's very much that they're still welcoming. They still talk to you, but it's they do the thing kind of like what what you're kind of taught to do when the police show up at your door, which is you know step outside with the police and close the door behind you. And that's kind of what they do when you knock on the door to discuss politics here in Douglas County. But you go down, you go down into the southern parts of the state, or up around Dahlonega, they'll invite you in. A lot of them will feed you. It's just a very different environment. Now, granted, I've never knocked on doors in Brookhaven, but you know.
Well, we've got to change that one of these days. In fact, my Republican state rep is going to need all the help she can get this fall against the Democrat, because unfortunately, it looks like we had more Democrat primary ballots cast in House District 80 than we did Republican. It was about 1450 to 1229, I think. So that is not a great sign for Republicans right here in the heart of the city.
Yeah, doesn't.
Did you say HD 80?
Yes, which I do have a little bit of a bias towards my own district, but if you go and look at the map of Georgia House districts, everything becomes concentric circles around Metro Atlanta. And right there at the center, straddling Fulton and DeKalb, you will see the bullseye House District 80. So I think our feeling of exceptionalism is entirely justified. Little bit of sarcasm there, don't worry. But yes, we did have more Democrat ballots cast, and it's interesting because this district was actually redistricted to try to make it more Republican after Mike Jacobs flipped. But unfortunately, it looks like that gerrymandering didn't work as well as planned.
Yeah, that's what happens when the individual in charge of doing the gerrymandering math doesn't have that valued college degree.
Well, I think the folks who did the last redistricting, they made their decisions based on the demographics as they were at the time. And, particularly with all the development we're seeing in these, suburban turning urban areas, you're getting a lot of apartments, you're getting a lot of younger folks. I mean, that's what Cobb County's having. I think Cobb County only had more Republican than Democrat ballots cast by a very small margin, something like 200 ballots.
Right, and it went blue in the presidential election.
Right.
That it did. That it did. So, are we skipping ahead to the state house races here? Because there are two that I'm excited about, but I don't want to get in the way of going down the statewide ballot.
I think we went about as far down the statewide ballot as any of our listeners are interested in.
You know what? I'm
not going to get all into the. What's that?
And that's Attorney General Chris Carr, who I think is a big fat loser. I was.
That's how you really feel, Matt.
I think he's a big fat loser. Mostly because he doesn't do his job. But I love that if you scroll up to the governor's race, and you see that on the Republican side there were 605,887 ballots cast in that particular thing. And then you roll on down there, there's 473,857, which means 132,000 people looked at it and went, eh. So
That's encouraging because I do have a little piece of information to share about our attorney general, which I'm sure will just get me accused of supporting his Democrat opponent, a former prosecutor from Fulton County. But historically, the position of attorney general in Georgia has required that you have the same qualifications as a judge, i.e., you've practiced law for 7 years. I mean, it makes sense. Would you hire a lawyer who has not practiced law, especially to represent your whole state? Well, conveniently, when Nathan Deal was chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee back in 1982, and they were writing the new Constitution, they changed it so it's not 7 years active practice of law. It's just 7 years as an active status member of the state bar, which is convenient for Chris Carr because he hasn't really practiced law. He's just worked as chief of staff for Johnny Isakson, campaign manager, and then, worked as a political appointee for Governor Deal. So it turns out that during that period where he was supposed to be an active status member of the bar, he wasn't doing the educational requirements that you're legally required to. So it's just very interesting to me that for this position that you would think we've got to be very nitpicky on, we've got to really double check the qualifications, that the state bar has said, well, he didn't do it. No big deal.
Right. Well, he doesn't do his job anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter.
Well, they've got about 100 lawyers, I think, working for the AG's office, and I know a lot of good, experienced folks there. So hopefully the prosecutions of Georgia's capital cases are in good hands.
I'll tell you what's not in good hands is the Open Records Act.
Right.
Well, and Jessica has just been so good on this. I just love the work that she and all the rest of y'all do at All on Georgia to just use those laws we have in Georgia to get government to turn over its records. And then when they don't do it, you write about it and put attention on them, and that seems to work. So kudos to Jessica, kudos to you guys for your great work on that.
So we'll start actually on the state house rep races of note. Start with District 7, which is David Ralston won with 74.11% of the vote, which that's disheartening to say the least. But Margaret Williamson had 25.89, so she was a complete blowout up there in Blue Ridge and in Ralston's neck of the woods. Although he does have a challenger, Rick Day, who got 100% of the vote in the district, of course, because he was running unopposed. However, it's not looking good looking at the numbers, as Ralston alone got 5,750 votes, and Margaret Williamson pulled 2,009 votes, and Rick Day pulled 936 votes.
That is what you call a Republican-leaning district.
It is. And speaking of real Republicans, moving right on down to District 8.
That's amazing. I am so happy to see that happen.
A friend of All on Georgia, Matt Gertler, with 60.17% of the vote. Mickey Cummings, who was apparently friends with House leadership, with 39.83. He's a friend of the chamber and a friend of the governor and a friend of David Ralston, and
what makes that, for people that don't know, what makes that District 8 race so awesome that curb stomped Cummings is the amount of money that the establishment poured into that race. That Nathan Deal and David Ralston were in that district campaigning for Cummings, and Gertler still prevailed decidedly. I love it.
It was just great news because it was disappointing to see the governor so actively campaign against an incumbent legislator who enjoyed the support of folks within his district. That's really unprecedented on a lot of levels. And so it's very impressive that Matt was able to triumph over that effort, and not just triumph narrowly. That's a decisive victory. He didn't just survive that challenge. That was a resounding victory of, hey, we actually like it that we have a representative who doesn't think every single bill coming through the legislature is worth voting yes on.
Right.
And we got Ken Pullen.
You
That
said
was just a
131.
terrific victory to get rid of Johnny Caldwell, a very, very powerful but very corrupt incumbent. The man was a judge and actually got kicked off of the position, which was very, very rare that the Judicial Qualifications Commission would take action because his sexual harassment of lawyers appearing before him was so egregious.
Wow. And then just to move on into the state legislature.
Exactly, and to have powerful positions with leadership as well. So it was a very clear message from leadership, oh, we're so sorry you got caught, Johnny. We're so sorry you got caught demanding sexual favors from lawyers appearing in front of you in court. We'll give you this nice cozy landing. And so for Ken Pullen to just go in, and again, it was another very decisive victory. This was not a close race.
Right. And Caldwell is the one he's essentially responsible for the taking the deal with the Judicial Qualifications Commission, right? And moving that over to where
Instrumental in the bill that placed that amendment on the ballot last year. He was instrumental in that legislation, along with Wendell Willard, who was the representative for District 51 up in Sandy Springs, as well as chairman of the Judiciary Committee. So there were a lot of heavy hitters, and Johnny Caldwell was right there in there. So it's nice to see that even a powerful swamp creature can be defeated by somebody working hard to get the message out that, hey, principles matter. But maybe the biggest surprise of last night was that total newcomer Colton Moore defeating John Deffenbaugh up in House District 1. It was a close race, but Colton, I think he might be 21, real young guy, pushing a very principled campaign, and he managed to edge out a really established politician. So it's too early to tell how things will go down at the Capitol, but certainly the work he did during the campaign, he talked a lot about justice issues, and anybody who cares about justice issues, that's what we need in Georgia government.
Right.
Right. Yeah, because it's that's certainly an issue that is coming up with deals, 8-year fake criminal justice reforms package that has done very little to help the criminal justice system. It's
Thank you, Jonathan. I am so glad because someone with your experience, you understand the system. You've lived the system not just from the side of the objectors and the critics, but from the other side as well. And so it was a PR move more than an actual substantive change to the justice system.
right, and a lot of what it did was it was very smart accounting because basically anybody that's involved in the criminal justice system in any facet knows that the probation system is set up for you to fail. It's not engineered for you to succeed. So basically what Deal did is he released all these people out of prison, and he put them on probation and parole. They became probation and parole's problem. Now here's where the funny math starts happening, because Governor Deal is going out and bragging that our prison numbers are down. We have less people in prison. But what he's not telling you is that all we're doing is just moving people around, because a lot of these same people are now in the county jails. So guess what? As a taxpayer, you're still paying for their bed and their care and their upkeep, but it's not showing on the state's prison rosters anymore. So now the governor looks good. Meanwhile, your property or your taxes are actually going up because the sheriffs have to get more money to be able to house all of these additional inmates. If you look statewide, you'll see that there have been what I believe to be, in many cases, legitimate demands for larger county jail facilities all over the state. Douglas County just recently got one not too many years ago. Paulding County is in the process of getting one now. They're happening all over. They've done constant renovations to Fulton County and keep expanding and expanding it as the county shrinks as citihoods happen. So,
Oh, cityhood. Someday we'll have to talk about Eagles Landing. I'm just trying to stop myself from getting on the soapbox about all these justice issues you are just nailing, Jonathan. It is, you know, so many people don't have contact with the justice system that it becomes kind of a secondary or even further down the line consideration in these elections. But that is the core of government. I mean, when we think about who we're electing to office, all these other issues, can they run government, can they run our justice system in a way that accords with constitutional principles? Can they live up to their oath of office? Call me old
No,
fashioned, but seems like that's to be the question we need to be asking a lot more often.
right. And so it's been a great show. We're about to the point where it's time to move on to the everybody's favorite ending section, which is the loser of the week. So let's see. Let's pull it up here and see who this week's loser of the week is. Let's see. And this week's loser of the week, throwing back to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago, is the Georgia Coalition for Job Creation. So, congratulations, Georgia Chamber of Commerce. You're this week's loser of the week.
Congratulations indeed. I'm sure Home Depot and Georgia Power are going to be very concerned that they did not get their money's worth since they are stuck with Ken Pullen and Matt Gertler and hopefully Colton Moore. I have high hopes for that young man.
So, Matt, who are you nominating this week for loser of the week?
oh man,
It's hard after the primaries, isn't it?
it is hard. Yeah, I'm so tempted to re-nominate my House rep again because, well, she's a loser, but I won't because I think I've nominated her twice.
Well, I mean, I could take loser of the week two ways. It's the Georgia Coalition for Job Creation. They're, capital L loser. But, certainly there are some folks who lost yesterday who, I think Georgia has lost out by not having them. Ken Shigley for Court of Appeals. I'm very disappointed that he didn't make it. Somebody who is, serious, thoughtful, willing to talk about injustices instead of just send out slick mailers with a bunch of endorsements.
Yeah, I loved his commercial. I thought I thought that the Piggly Wiggly commercial was just, it was definitely low budget shot, which, I like low budget in my politics. It speaks to me. Yeah, it's like I come from a world where I create media, so when I look at this stuff, the first thing that's flying through my head is how much it costs to produce that. And I'm like looking at some of these mailers and looking at some of these TV ads, and it's like, wow, some of you guys just spend a fortune. But
I think I'm going to nominate Nathan Deal
okay.
because he's the governor and kind of seen as the de facto head of the Republican Party in the state, and he was out actively campaigning against other Republicans, and I think that's I don't know, it should be a violation of some kind of ethics law.
I'm going to be a little bit petty. I'm going to nominate the AJC, but my reasoning is what is petty. And it piggybacks off of your nomination, Matt. If you have read any articles recently from the AJC, and I don't know what the purpose of this is. I don't know if they've received a new press shot or what. But, for the longest time, Nathan Deal, he appeared to be just a constipated old man. He always looked like he was, just having all kinds of intestinal problems. But this new photo that the AJC is using, he looks like Santa without a beard. He's wearing the glasses. He just looks very reflective and, kind of geriatric. And I don't like it. I want my mean governor back.
Well, Nathan Deal is a very smart man. You got to give him credit for that. He started his career as a prosecutor up in Hall County. His son is a Superior Court judge there. I have had the pleasure of appearing before him for a felony trial, which was very enjoyable, particularly the not guilty on all counts that my client received. But Nathan Deal has really used his power as a lawyer specifically to shape Georgia law and politics and the Constitution in just a really powerful way. So, I don't like what he did to shape it, but I got to give him credit for doing it very effectively over the past 4 or 5 decades.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely, you cannot deny his effect on Georgia government. Whether you like it or not is certainly up for discussion. But yeah, his effect cannot be denied. So what about you, Catherine? Who are you nominating for this week's Loser of the Week?
Well, gosh, I didn't know about this exciting feature, but I have to say I'm going to pick Chris Carr. After getting those numbers from Matt, I just think that is, I can't take credit for people getting the information about him failing to complete his continuing legal education requirements, because honestly, a lot of people are going to say, it's a technicality anyway. If the state bar doesn't care, why should I? But to me, those 132,000 people, they recognized that this is a false choice. Just having one guy on here and we're just supposed to check the box. What is this? Soviet Russia? Give us some real choices. So that's my nomination.
I love it too, because when we first started this segment, Chris Carr he had a permanent spot.
Yeah, Chris Carr was number 3.
Always.
Yeah, because in the beginning when we first started doing this segment, I didn't actually nominate anybody. So Jessica made a nomination, Matt made a nomination, and Chris Carr was always, option number 3. And then I started nominating people, so Chris Carr kind of went away. But he's been back several times, and as a matter of fact, Chris Carr is our most nominated Loser of the Week. So do we have any closing thoughts? Any closing remarks? We can't tell people to vote anymore. I have a closing thought. Pick up your yard signs. Please. For the love of God, get your yard signs.
My closing thought will be about turnout. Again, we saw really low turnout in a lot of areas, particularly in the urban areas. I mean, when we're talking, sub 15%, sub 10%, to me, that is the public sending a message. We don't care. This is not interesting to us. This is not, where we want to spend our time. And I think for a long time, political insiders have told themselves, oh, well, this is just, the small slice of the educated people who really care about what's going on in their community. But when I look around, I see people who care about their community, going out and participating in volunteer organizations, their church or their school or other things. It just seems like politics is becoming so toxic that the good people in the community just don't care. And I don't know. Are we encouraging them by continuing to treat these contests with the seriousness that we do? So there's my closing thought.
Right on. Matt?
My closing thought has nothing to do with the content of the show, actually, but it is that there was a bill that went through the House and the Senate, and it was voted down, that had to do with baiting deer during deer season. And apparently Deal has exercised some executive privilege and instructed the Department of Natural Resources to come up with something, to put an end to it. For those that don't know, the southern part of the state, you're allowed to bait when you're hunting, and the northern part of the state, you are not. The Department of Natural Resources is holding open meetings on the proposed regulation June 19th in Rome at Armucci High School, and 20th at Augusta Tech in the auditorium.
So, wait, just to be very clear here, just to make sure I'm understanding you, what you're saying is that this came up in the legislature voted it down, and Deal basically said, no, we're going to do it anyway?
Well, what he said was for the Department of Natural Resources to do something with it, because there's not parity. You know, it's one of those things where it is legal in one spot, and in theory, a boundary line away, it is not legal. Now I'm going to go to that meeting and speak to it because I think they should outlaw baiting statewide.
I was going to ask, I know you're a big hunter, Matt, and my impression was that people kind of think baiting is tacky. It's just not a done thing. Am I right?
Well, people do it. They do it a lot, actually. It's real easy. It helps with kids when they're getting their first deer and trying to figure it out. But my objection to it is that CWD, which is the deer version of mad cow disease, is spread through saliva and things like that. And it's a disease that we're trying to keep out of our deer herd. And the closest that it has come so far is Mississippi. And that just happened last year. It's been further away than that. But it's inevitable that it's going to come. So I think that it's smart to slow that process. And, the fastest way to speed that process is going to be to put a big ass pile of corn out and have a bunch of deer rubbing noses in it. So, but regardless of how you feel about it, those two meetings are being held. And if it's something that affects you, you should go.
Yeah, absolutely. The game regulations are certainly an important part of Georgia law, and we should probably stop this show because I've been counting Matt's beer consumption, and I believe I'm up to number 4.
Nah, I'm only on 2.
I wondered why those little video chats went off. I swear I heard a lighter too.
No, I don't smoke. So, Giles.
Hey, I'm not smoking while I'm doing this.
Well, it has been a delight getting to be on this podcast with you guys. I have enjoyed listening to the other episodes and was very honored to be invited.
Well, we appreciate you coming.
Jessica ever elopes to Mexico again, let me know.
We certainly will. All right. Well, y'all have a great week, and we will see you next week.
Later.
Take care, y'all. Bye-bye.